I'm the chair of the Learned Society and Technical Strategy Board for CIHT, and through the next 2 days CIHT are running sessions focusing on the key themes of the organisation. And for the part of the organisation that I'm the chair of, this Learned Society, we're looking at these 5 clear themes for this year and the coming year. And Delivering for People, which is the title for this session, is it's quite interesting, talking over someone else. Delivering for People, which is the focus for this session, is one of the key themes that we're looking at as a group that represents something like 13,000 professionals in the transportation sector. So a really key aspect for us to be considering. Delivering for People, how are we describing that? That's what we're talking about, building on the understanding that parts of the sector and others, because not everybody has the same view about this subject, have about how people's needs should drive infrastructure and services. Rather than thinking about giving people things and thinking they should be grateful for having excellent roads and wonderful trains and superior aircraft and airports, actually it's talking about you and I when we're the passengers, when we're the users, when we're the neighbours, and thinking about what people want that should drive the development of those infrastructure elements. So our programme today, I'm just going to do a quick 5 or 6 minutes on some of the views that I think that we're developing in CIHT, and then we've got 2 presentations this afternoon. Joe Field's going to talk about stakeholder engagement, one of those key things about communicating with people. And then our second and last session is talking about a specific project on the M1 smart motorways, and Lorraine and Mal are going to talk about that. And they're going to focus quite a lot about stakeholder engagement and and collaboration in projects for what has turned out to be a very successful trial. So let's talk a little bit about what I was talking about and what we're doing in our area. What are we thinking about when we're talking about delivering for people? I'd like to think that what we're considering is the role of places. It's funny, the language that's used to describe actually how we talk about transportation. We often don't talk about why it's there. And usually, as we all know, it's about getting from one place to another. So what are the roles of the places? Why do we want to go from A to B? Let's think about what the role of the places are. Is it about schools? Is it about industry? Is it about production yards to delivery from the people who are going to sell the products? Are we talking about our workplace? Are we talking about leisure? So what is the role of place? Let's be clear about what that drives in terms of transportation. We're creating for people. I think all of us are involved or have been involved with organisations. We often sometimes lose the identity of the individual. We want both. We want both the identity of the individual. We also want to think about people as groups, representative groups, organisations, industries. And let's not forget that actually what we're doing is we're delivering for all. Reality is, we probably tend to think, as I did when I was in the road sector, I'm thinking about car drivers, I'm thinking about lorry drivers, I'm thinking about people who use the strategic road network. Well, actually, that's a fraction of the society. Do I worry about whether those drivers are all very competent? I might well do if we're going to come on and talk about complying with speed limits. Do we worry about people who are going to access buses, how people use cycleways? A lot of these things I know all of us now think we're a lot more familiar with, but actually are we looking at it from the right end of the telescope? Are we thinking about it from not just what do we want to do as the service provider or the project provider, but what do people want from us? And last but not least, developing for society, a phrase that probably we're not all quite as familiar with thinking about a new way of thinking about us as groups, as organisations, as what does society want. And it's really interesting because when you use that word, I can often see people sort of glaze over a little. This is the bit that we don't scale. We can't put boundaries around quite as easy as we can around an organisation. But actually this is about those themes that we think about when we think about society. They're not necessarily driven by thinking about the road user. They're not necessarily driven by thinking about the lorries on the road. So, delivering for people. So, what would be CIHT's approach? Well, I think pretty importantly, we want to focus on multimodal options. I'm not going to read out everything that's on that slide. We want to think about transport delivering for better connections, creating places for people to live. I know these are things we've talked about a lot, but actually they need to be repeated. They need to be shared more widely, because I think we're still very much in our silos. We need to think about systems and places that are accessible to all. It's moved on enormously, access for transportation, and there's some really good practices out there, but it isn't wide scale. If you go to different parts of the country, you see considerably different levels of provision. And I don't just mean picking out London as an exemplar, because actually London still has a lot of problems about access. But it's thinking about the rural locations as much as we worry about big cities. And thinking about how this theme, delivering for people, underpins all the other themes that we're talking about, that we're focusing on for CIHT. After the what is always the how. Yes, we'd like a clear transportation strategy and vision. Actually, government's just produced a transport strategy in July of this year. Be interesting if you got an opportunity to go back and look at it. When you look at it in the perspective of delivering for people, do we think if we follow that strategy, we'll get the sorts of services that have people at the heart of it? Develop a method for identifying what people need and how to fund it. This is very much focusing on the analysis. Let's not forget that actually, if we're going to understand what the demand are for services and what services they are, we actually need to analyse all that data we collect. There's an awful lot of data out there. And we come importantly also into asking people. So we're going to come and talk about actually how we do that stakeholder engagement. We need the increased collaboration that you're going to have an example of in our second case study later on. We need to work together. We, the industry, need to work with, not just within the industry more effectively, but with the groups that represent the users, the non-users, the neighbours, the local authorities. It's an almost endless list, I know, but we'll hear about some of the techniques about identifying who the key stakeholders for the sorts of activities we'll be focusing on. And last but not least is about the future, the uncertainty of the future. One of the things that I think CIHT is focusing on is how do we put some sort of sense around looking forward. Let's not just worry about how we solve today's problems, although they're big enough, but how we're going to prepare ourselves and what do we need to do for making sure we can deal with some of the things that are coming over the horizon.